as a veteran who has been at Fort Stewart, who's recently been at Fort Stewart, but also as a veteran who served in active duty in the same unit that one of the Fort Hooders was at, we need to have a conversation, specifically to the civilians. I am begging the civilians to listen to this because you have so much power right now and you have no idea. First of all, I just want to clarify that I am not currently at Fort Stewart. I appreciate all of the messages. People were getting mixed up because even though I talk about being in Texas again, people, because I was in a news article related to Fort Stewart a couple years back, I guess thought I was still there, and maybe because like Fort Hood was my first duty station, they think, because when I'm talking about Texas, I'm talking about old times. No, I'm currently in Texas. I appreciate all of the concern, but I am not at Fort Stewart, but it is still extremely important. I am begging you to listen. A lot of you guys know about the Vanessa situation, the Vanessa case. She's got a memorial. She was the young soldier. Her life was taken by another soldier. Here's what a lot of people don't understand about that, though, is civilians are the only reason she was found. So whenever she was initially found, people were talking about how they were finding all of these bodies, right, of other soldiers in a very particular area in Killeen, finding all of these bodies, right? And they're like, what the heck is going on? They're following all of these people, all of these soldiers who had been, almost every single one of them, didn't have a missing persons report. They had an AWOL. They were listed as AWOL. Nobody had ever looked for them. That the only reason they found them is because Vanessa was blowing up. Here's the reality of it, is if you know anything about the Vanessa case, they weren't looking. They were not looking. They were going to do the exact same thing to her. The only reason that anything happened is because civilians, her family, put pressure. Her family, her friends, she had squad mates who were secretly making a few calls to the news and stuff, feeding information to the family, let them know. They pushed, so they actually looked. Realistically, if she had not had that support from civilians, because that is all the military care about is civilians, because they got contracts with active duty. They can shove you, they can make you look crazy, they can make it seem like they'll kick you out, all kinds of stuff. But civilians don't have that. They care about what the public thinks. They want the public to perceive things as being handled and well kept and well together. But if she had not had that push, she had not had this, I genuinely believe she would have been marked AWOL, just like everybody else. She would have not been found. I know people are probably really confused right now because they're like, hey, but they know who shot up Fort Stewart. Here's the thing. We know who pulled the trigger. We don't know who supplied the ammo. And I don't mean the physical ammo. I mean the metaphorical ammo. And hear me out. So when I got to Fort Hood and got in that unit, and like, it's been a conspiracy theory that people started too, that like, that's why I got taken into a combat unit, because I was Seabird. I'm like, how the heck did I get here? Why are they so willing to take me? I've done a story time on that. My sponsor didn't show up, and they were like, oh, we need numbers. And they had the worst retention, like worst retention. I could do a million stories on that. I have blasted Sergeant Peterson before with photos and all, and the stuff that happened with him, what happened with Sergeant First Class Blanco. Like, there's witnesses, there's documentation, there are medical records, some of the bad stuff was happening. It seemed like 3 Corps got to Turkey and was like, nope, anything back there, nope, we're not going to have anything to do with. And I ended up in that same unit that the shooter had, one of them, because there's been 2, that had been in, ended up meeting people who served with him. And I want to be 1,000% crystal clear. I mean, as clear as the diamond on Beyonce's big ring, like rich people diamond clear, crystal clear, see-through. I do not condone any kind of mass shooting. This is not an excuse. There's no excuses for this kind of stuff. There is no exception to this behavior. But just like what happened at Fort Hood, where anybody who's been over there and stuff and knows the full details knows there was a lot of ammo handed to him in that situation. There was hazing involved. There was SA, but there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of stuff that was not just deployment stuff. There was deployment stuff, but that's like mostly what the news covered. It's because he went crazy because of the deployment. And that was a factor, but it was not the only factor. And while, yes, the majority of the people that were involved ended up losing their lives, and that is not, I'm not saying that is fair, equal. I'm not saying they deserve to lose their lives. But there were other people involved that got a slide under the rug, that never had any consequences, and never will, unfortunately. Just like with school shooters, with Columbine and stuff. One of the mothers of Columbine literally has made all kinds of money, books, TED Talks, on her being a failure as a parent. Now, luckily, nowadays, they're starting to charge parents, like there's a new law here in Texas and everything, where they're starting to charge these parents of these psychos But it needs to be the same thing with other mass shootings, including on military bases. But if civilians do not put pressure on this, the person who pulled the trigger will be the only person that will face any kind of repercussions. And it can end up making a never-ending cycle. Everyone talks about the 22 a day with veterans, which is great. It's the whole reason I started a YT channel, just so that I can eventually monetize to be able to open up a Veterans Crisis Center, because we need one here. It's so bad. You know, one that actually provides real resources and doesn't put people on hold and crap. But what a lot of people don't talk about is the active duty numbers. Because if you just were to look up like how many soldiers on base take their life, they don't have to count any of the ones that happen off base, is the thing. If somebody's living off base, if somebody's on leave when it happens, if they happen to be out in town when they do that, yeah, they don't count any of that. They don't have to in their statistics, because it didn't technically happen on base, even though it's still an active duty soldier or an active duty sailor, Marine, whatever the case may be. I am begging civilians to put pressure on this, just like they've done in the past with other cases, because it's the only way anything gets done. Like I said, when people with the Vanessa case were finding out that was their first, they were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all this stuff has happened. Why isn't all of these other cases and stuff been in the news? Why hasn't this been in the news? And they were deep diving and finding all the stuff that's going around, like with the gangs and all the stuff that was happening in Fort Hood. And they're like, holy crap, this has been happening for decades. Like, if you go back, I posted a video the other day while I was on Fort Stewart for something, and there were people who were coming in, they were like, yeah, in the 90s, we had this happen, because I had caught somebody on video doing something. And people were like, oh yeah, they had all these issues back in the 90s too, in the 80s, and it's bad. Or it might have been the 90s and 2000. I have to look back, but either way, this has been going on for decades. And when the Vanessa case happened, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, there's so much craziness. I am begging civilians. You can pretend like you didn't even see this video, make your own, okay, for all you care, and be like, I'm a true crime, and I just thinking about it is my first thought, or whatever. I don't care. I don't care about credit. I just want civilians to put pressure on this, because you are creating a never-ending cycle. It is whoever caused that pushover for him to get there, because you got to keep in mind, Fort Stewart has not been going to very... They've been doing a lot of Poland and Germany and, like, you know, South Korea and all that lately. It's not been, you know, as intense, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that they're not just, you know, rotations aren't stressful and stuff too. But the probability that this Fort Stewart soldier just woke up and did this, and there wasn't some other crap going on, once again, does not condone what he did. But the people that played a part in it need to be, we need to figure out what happened here. Because you are creating a cycle. Because soldiers that go through that kind of stuff, if he's having that reaction or whatever he was going through, what are other people's reactions? Because I can tell you what they are. As somebody who volunteers in domestic violence, it's a lot of that. It's a lot of physical assault. It is a lot of taking your own life. It's a lot of ending up in addiction. I am begging civilians to put pressure on this, because that is the only way that this is not going to get swept under the rug, and whoever added to this to make him go over the edge is not going to be held accountable. There's not going to be an investigation unless civilians put pressure on it. And I'm sorry that this is over an 8-minute video, but I am begging you to put pressure on this situation. Some of you have massive platforms that are, I have almost 1,000 mutuals, and I don't like asking for favors or anything like that, but some of y'all got some really, like, millions and millions and stuff. So I am begging you. Civilians, please put pressure on this. There is way too much scum that is allowed in the service, and a lot of crap that's not, I mean, you can even just look at the statistics of things like SA and assault and hazing and stuff. You know, people pretend like it doesn't happen, but it still does, and the only time it ever gets attention is if civilians start putting pressure. I am begging y'all to put pressure, please.